Live-to-VOD, and we'll talk a little bit about that. My name is Aslam Khadir. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Elemental Technologies, and many of you probably know about Elemental. If not, then we are essentially a video processing and delivery platform solution that runs on appliances, in virtual machines, and in the cloud. Software-defined video is a moniker that we coined a couple of years ago and have been essentially leading the charge in that regard. And the other thing we have been pretty well known for has been our 4K and HEVC solutions. It came to market really early. Today we're going to focus on Live-to-VOD and why that's important and how it's being done, what are some of the challenges, why it's happening now versus, versus 5 years ago or 5 years from now. So we'll talk through some of that. Obviously we'll take some audience questions at the end. I want to introduce my panelists quickly here. We have a pretty distinguished set of panelists here. We have David Adams from EverSport, so he'll take you quickly through his both what EverSport does and his own background. We have Corey Smith from Microsoft, and we have Victor Borachuk from Jupiter Returns. So each of them will take a few minutes to talk about their company and what they do, and then we'll go into a set of questions. Hopefully to get a discussion going around Live-to-VOD, and then we'll take questions from the audience. So let's make it as interactive as possible. And if you do during the course of the conversation have a comment you want to make urgently, raise your hand, and we'll see if we can accommodate that. All right? So thanks, David.
Hi, thanks. So I'm David Adams from EverSport. We are a end-to-end streaming platform specifically for sporting rights holders and fans. We are an end-to-end solution encompassing from downlinking code and streaming all the way through to marketing and monetization and customer care. In the heart of our platform is a content rights management solution that allows our rights holders to manage everything about their events that they've got, including geo-blocking and rights management, the automation of the marketing to automatically kick off Twitter and Facebook kinds of alerts to games and things like that. The monetization to allow them to set up in different territories what kind of, whether it's ad-based or pay-per-view or subscription-based, and have it different prices in different locations. As well as deep insights to the analytics of what's going on with their viewership and where and across what kind of devices. Our service it's actually two parts in terms of what the viewer sees, either on our own website where we've aggregated all the content. This is an example of a weekend where we were playing La Liga and Serie A soccer. We have VOD and live events available where the user can search for the kind of content they want there. On the next slide real quick. But we also have a smart embeddable player where we can find audiences in different countries by embedding the video on third-party websites and allowing us to enhance the viewership and allowing our partners, content rights holders, to maximize their audience and the monetization of that content. So in this case, the back there we had one where we are on a website that was a journalist site, and the other is actually on a league site. So we can, in the case of the Pac-12, we have something on Pac12.com as well as on different school sites. So we're a fairly new company, but we've got, in our first year, over 2,000 events processed, and we're planning to do 5,500 plus this year, and growing to over 10,000 for next year, and some of the accounts that we're working with today. That's good. So thank you.
Thanks, David. Corey, do you want to?
Sure. So good morning. I'm Corey Smith. I run the broadcast solutions team for Xbox Live. Some of you guys probably saw my keynote presentation yesterday, so some of this is going to be stuff that you saw yesterday, but I've added a few things, obviously, to make this more engaging content instead of just rinse and repeat. Our live events, from a standpoint, we've done over 100 events at this point. The team is actually pretty small. There's only 13 of us, actually. For the first couple of years, I actually used to do all the planning and coding, distribution all by myself until I was able to actually convince somebody to give me some money to hire people, which was, at Microsoft, it's kind of interesting scenario there. So our Xbox One reveal, looking back 2 years ago, from the 360 perspective, we shipped HSS, HDS, and HLS. The combination of all those streams turned out to be 44 different unique streams for each language that we actually shipped. So running a broadcast of 44 simultaneous events is quite hairy. And a lot of what we've tried to do over the last couple of years is really systematically optimize our workflow so we pare down that both from an operational standpoint but also a resource management contention standpoint on the encoders themselves. So the Xbox One live event, the reveal, 2 years ago, we ran at a 6 megabit top bit rate. Again, 44 streams, one per language per origin. E3 this last year is where we saw so much more of our optimization, both in the use of Azure Media Services from an origin standpoint and just-in-time repackaging, but also the ability to kind of pare down what we actually ship out of the broadcast facility. So this last year we shipped a 9 megabit per second top bit rate, 4 streams out, 1 clean, 1 burn-in for closed captioning to meet our FCC requirements. And then we had basically a primary and backup origin stream. So going from 44 to 2 was a huge optimization that we were able to actually accomplish in the last couple of years. So our VOD infrastructure, the use of Conductor Live and Server that we have in our infrastructure today makes it easy for us to manage multiple events and profiles, especially with now version 3. And that's the new version of essentially the Elemental operating system running on the Live and the Conductor encoders. We can deliver bit rates at high quality. The repackaging we can do sometimes on Delta also allows us to do some pre-packaging before it actually gets to the Azure Media Services Foundation. We take one incoming stream and change it to MPEG-HLS, HSS, HDS, if we so choose to do, on our just-in-time repackaging up in the cloud. So we move all of our workflow from a heavy re-encoding standpoint or repackaging standpoint from our on-prem gear that's doing most of our IP conversion out to our cloud infrastructure. The VOD content filters that we can do both on the Delta from a fast clipping standpoint and a fast follow VOD standpoint in the AMS infrastructure that we have allows us to be completely flexible on taking live events and clipping them on the fly to create those VOD assets so we can go immediately back to air with them from a customer perspective. If they miss something, we can clip those as an event kind of drives through our platform. We can immediately, obviously, gain more eyeballs on those VOD assets as they get republished. The ease of optimization of staff and resources at scale is what was huge for us, obviously, as a team being fairly small. I don't have an army of people to do all these post edits, so being able to clip on the fly was a huge time saver for us. It means that I can have one of my engineers actually work on post VOD asset clipping in a very systematic way, where if we have an event running for an hour and a half, we can be up and running in VOD shortly after that within about 5 minutes, which is actually pretty nice. Before, it used to take us close to an hour and a half sometimes to get into the actual manifest itself and actually start snipping the HSS manifest, which is quite painful if you're trying to do it on a frame segment of that video track. Server encoders encodes assets and uploads them to Akamai via Aspera. One of the things we've done from an optimization standpoint, from a workflow perspective, is utilize Signiant and Aspera and some of those other tools to high-speed transport our files around our ecosystem. Both from Signiant ingest via our media shuttle, we can actually bring in any asset from anywhere in the world, comes through our encode pipeline, and we can actually be up and running, ready to program that asset within 10 minutes. right now, from a turnaround time, the NFL files that go up for the Xbox One NFL app today, we get a direct pipeline from the NFL via Signet, and those files are then encoded in near real time and then pushed up via Azure or Aspera to our CDN providers. And then from there, they're able to be published inside the Xbox One app itself for the NFL. And those files typically run about every less than 10 minutes, actually, between the time we ingest and the time they're available for programming. Our VOD platform workflow, obviously, kind of see the left-hand side where a lot of our media ingest occurs through our media shuttle platform. Once those assets get then ingested via the web, they land on our Iceland storage system, where our file listeners, from the Elemental standpoint, wait for those assets to stop moving. Once the assets start moving back into the encode process, we then kick them back to our storage platform that then Aspera picks up and moves out to Akamai CDN or Limelight CDN. Once the files are actually encoded and moved up to our CDN providers, we then send email notifications back to our customers in an automated way that allows them to do whatever they need with the links. They're now publicly accessible. Some of this workflow actually allows us to do embargoed content. So our portal actually allows us to put date timestamp ranges that automatically apply to tokenized URLs at CDN Edge to kind of protect those assets to a given point in time where they can be then unlocked, which is great for pre-processing content for a large event when you don't want those assets to be discoverable on the web or hijacked in any way and made public before it's really time to do so. So our OTT platform is part of our linear experience. We ingest files again via Signet Media Shuttle or Azure Blob Storage. We can conform ITX playout via Elemental Server. So our ITX platform, which is essentially a Grass Valley product, runs our entire core of our linear OTT platform. And as files come through the encode process from a VOD standpoint, they're placed on our Iceland backend storage, which is then available to the ITX for us to program and schedule it in terms of a linear playout. We can then switch between VOD and live, which was what we did yesterday for our keynote presentation, the technical demo. We actually exercise live in production the end-to-end workflow that we're speaking to here. We basically have several television stations in a box via our ITX platform. We have 2 channels full-time right now. We're bringing 3 new ones online towards the end of the year that'll have basically everything that you would need to actually launch and run a television station. Channels and assets are scheduled via the web interface, so we provide APIs for our tooling to go in and actually change dynamically those manifests that are on the linear playout system. So we can actually drive channel optimization from a user perspective and let them actually drive what is actually in the playout channel. So via polling or other client interactivity, we can then build dynamic manifests that go in and change the sorting order of that playout, sort of like reordering a television station on the fly. Stream to Elemental Delta with Elemental Live Encoders. Again, that's part of our workflow process where we can pre-process content information before it hits their Azure AMS services. The VOD segments are created, live playout available within Delta. Those assets then can be programmed to the ITX or moved up to CDN for other kind of programming via the web or other places. Variety of files come in. Most of the time we see stereo files, but again, we have the ability with our Elemental servers to do the 5.1 Dolby encode decode as part of the workflow as well. So we can ingest both stereo and multi-channel audio files along with UHD and 4K. We're actually working on a 4K project right now for a game that's going to launch next year called Quantum Break. So I hope everybody gets excited about that because it should be actually a fun ride. And right now, because of the way that Elemental supports HDR, right now we're able to do BT 2020 pass-through encodes if the files have been already pre-processed with the HDR spec and color space. I didn't have anything else.
No, that's great.
I'm out of stuff to talk about.
We will have questions for you, though. So, but I'd like Victor to talk about Jupiter Return and tell us a little bit about what he does.
Thanks for coming out. My name is Victor Borchak from Jupiter Return. And so our perspective is kind of a little bit different than David and Corey, where we're kind of more the man on the ground. So it's a full service production company end to end. And so we'll a lot of times stream to platforms like EverSport or to an Azure platform or something like that. And so a lot of what I'll talk about today is for New York Fashion Week, because that's an event that has kind of taken our workflow from like a very basic beginning to what it is now. And I mean, that's an event that started out very basically as like, you know, Final Cut machines editing VOD files. And it became something to where you wouldn't really think that fashion is necessarily one of the most like intense streaming events, but believe it or not, it is. It's one of those things where, you know, designers will come up with something very kind of aggressive as far as what they want to accomplish and everything. And so we've kind of had to develop a platform from scratch that can not only do a lot of those enterprise type things with, you know, VOD and instantly turning around packages and stuff like that. So as soon as the runway's over, it's looping immediately and we can get the fly pack out and move on to the next event. But also to do things, you know, like social interactions and things like that. So we can also have overlays where we've developed something that on the VOD file, you can see like each look comes down the runway. And so normally that would just be video on a screen. You watch it, you see 50 looks come down. It doesn't really do anything for the client after that. They get a report of X amount of viewers watched this file. But what does that mean? So like we'll time those looks coming down the runway. You'll have 10 people liked look 1, 15 people liked look 2, 15 people liked look 3, nobody liked look 4. So afterwards, not only do you have a total amount of views, but you also know which looks resonated. So it gives that designer some type of like real-time feedback. So a lot of the stuff that we do kind of is aimed at delivering the video, but also kind of solving a problem and giving the client real-time feedback and something a little bit more than just that type of basic one-directional experience. And so as far as what we've done with Elemental on that is we switched over all the encoding to live. So that gives us a lot more density on site because the event initially was at Lincoln Center. And so from there you have, I would say like, you know, it's like upwards of maybe around 100 shows. So you have 100 shows that are back to back to back to back. And in that type of workflow, there's one thing goes wrong and then you're backed up for the entire day. So you're backed up the entire day and then you're always behind catching up. People start coming up to you. And I'm sure that if all you guys have done this before, so you know how that is when any type of workflow falls behind, like things start to fail. So we kind of had to develop something where we went from making all that stuff in Final Cut. When we got integrated, we integrated like a kind of a more advanced on-site process to kind of build those files right away and deliver VOD real time. And then it got even faster where we were able to do that all in the cloud. So that was initially using Elemental Cloud. We capture all that in the cloud, concatenate the bumpers on the end, and then from there, that VOD is immediately ready. So it's like every show finishes, you have about 15 minutes between shows, and that VOD is ready to watch. So it's ancient history, we don't have to worry about it. We're moving on to the next one. End of the day, everybody goes home at 9 o'clock versus 1 a.m. And you know, in the course of any event, like once you can master that workflow and you have that down, then you can start to build onto things like what we've been able to do with the looks. And you know, we did like a periscope switcher for a show, but if you're always struggling to get that workflow solid and something that's functional that you're not worried about breaking, you'll never get to that level. You'll never be able to solve something for your clients. You're always dealing with the technology, and that's not something that anybody cares about except for the people in this room. Like we care about the technology and all that type of stuff and how it works, but your clients care about what the results are for them. Like how many people are watching my show, what looks are resonating, what should I design for next season, that type of stuff. They don't care about like, you know, what kind of camera you shot it on or how everything's working. They just want it to work. So that's kind of that's the big thing that we've focused on. And as we get more into the panel, I'll kind of explain more parts of all those different workflow steps. But essentially, it's been taking the on-site workflow from a live workflow on-site to taking that live workflow and moving it totally to the cloud. So that way, everything is kind of totally, we have like unlimited resources. Everything's coming out of a data center. We're not really worried about having a limited resource set on site that we can, you know, somebody asks us to add something and we can't do that. But yeah, so we'll get more into it as we move on with the panel.
Great. Thanks a lot, Victor. So it's a good segue into really the key question I want to start off with, which is why is there such a demand for Live-to-VOD? Why is it becoming imperative that you have these assets available more or less instantly after that show is broadcast or the live event takes place? Why is that happening? What's causing that demand to happen? David, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. For us, it's all about the sporting event, and people want to watch the game, and sometimes they miss the game. And when you're broadcasting, especially internationally, they might be sleeping. We're doing college basketball, and in London or in Singapore, they might be sleeping or at work or whatnot, and they can't watch it. So during the event, there's quite a bit of activity around DVR and being able to go back and see plays and whatnot, which we have automated with Akamai. But as soon as that event is over, we need to make it available for all of our subscribers so that they can see the event. And that process needs to also include all the same rules and metadata for the live event to be inherited down from the live event to the VOD assets, so that the same geo-blocking happens and whatnot. But that's essentially what's driving it for us.
Right. So for you, it seems like it's really the global attractiveness of content. Content, even if an event is happening in one time zone or one country or one region, it still is interesting to people across the world, and you need to make that available so that they can view it on their convenience, but as soon as possible, right?
Right. So we work with the rights holders to events that believe that there are global audiences for these events. We talked this morning about the NFL being the largest audience in the United States, but it's not even in the top 10 globally. Soccer has 3.2 billion fans around the world. And when we put an AS Roma game up, there'll be people from every corner of the world wanting to watch a friendly match. And they're not all up at the time that the game is played. So
Good.
that's fundamentally the reason.
Corey, what about you? How is what content you're doing or what audiences you're going after really forcing you to be really crisp in terms of how you create these VOD assets?
Sure. So a lot of the Xbox community is ferocious in terms of the media they're actually wanting to consume, both on Twitch and YouTube and other forms of social engagement. So we have to really be thoughtful in our workflow process to make sure that those assets are in the same kind of publishing pipeline as we have with YouTube and Twitch and others. So the fact that when something does go to VOD, we're not competing against ourselves, and we continue to track those eyeballs to the Xbox platform so we don't lose the engagement. So from our perspective, VOD is an extension of our live event. We actually, because of the fast follow VOD that we're actually able to achieve now, we're actually able to monetize those customers faster on our own digital marketplace. And we're able to then time shift those VOD files to make available in Europe, in Asia, in Australia, where the time zones are so much different than, say, a US audience at 10 a.m. is not going to be the same audience that watches that file in Europe and APAC. Because of the way that Xbox is consumed globally, it's important for us to make sure that those files are up and available in fairly rapid fashion, so we continue to make sure that the audiences that haven't watched the event, to your point about the sports, is able to be consumed from an international perspective.
And like Corey was saying, to me, it's really about really bad attention spans. We all know, like 5 seconds after you could have the biggest event in the world, and a week later, it's like it never happened, or it happened 50 years ago. So, when you have a show like that, like, again, to talk about Fashion Week, if we have a runway, in a month, people could care less about that runway. It's like it happened, it could have been in the 70s, it doesn't matter. But, so you want to make sure that that's available to watch right away. And also, a big thing with that is, and it's 2015 and it's crazy that that's the case, but it's crazy that, like, a lot of platforms don't support all devices. We're doing an event in London right now, the Race of Champions, and like, you go to watch it on Android, you must download Hook Player, which to me is like, go watch something else. Like, the minute something doesn't work, like, the only person that would sit there and fiddle with it would be like my mom if I asked her to watch my show. She would sit there and go through a couple steps, but any other person is going to be, oh, it doesn't work, whatever, it doesn't work.
Well, that's interesting to speak about the clients, because one of the many challenges we have is actually making sure that there's one client that is consumable on all devices that can consume those same streams. So we're not standing up 16 different events essentially simultaneously. So finding that smart tech that actually allows us to stream as a television service on all those different devices and platforms is actually critical to us as a broadcaster and as somebody that does large live events. And it's becoming challenging to find those individual devices because everybody has their own encoding protocols that they want to be able to support, and a lot of times the proprietariness of those streaming protocols don't translate to all devices, which makes it really tough.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, like I was saying, just making sure that you're available to be watched and everything is huge. And being able to turn that around instantaneously it's really just about the timing, making sure that you can just make that live event, like Corey was saying, like the VOD, you have to really view it as an extension of the live event. Because if you look at any video online like a month or two later, I mean, unless there's something that happens in the news that's timely that references it, it's as good as not being online. So, I mean, and the way that, I mean, it's similar kind of to the way that he was talking about, like our embed code kind of works the same way, where pre-event we'll have, just a pre-show slate. That same embed code will dynamically update to the live stream, dynamically update to VOD. So if I'm watching on a device, it's as if nothing ever happened. Like we'll keep the live stream up on a loop or something like that, and that VOD, once we set the in and out point, that playlist is regenerated in a couple, like 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and it's pretty much VOD right after live for all practical purposes. So
that's good. So let's talk about a couple of different other use cases of Live-to-VOD. I know we've focused primarily on instantaneous VOD asset creation as the event concludes. What about things like start over experiences where there's a live thing going on, you tune in, but you really don't want to start in the middle of a event. You want to start in the beginning of the event, or catch-up TV experiences. Are those things something that you're doing today or looking to do? Yeah.
Clearly with sports, it's a mandatory thing for us to do. Somebody comes into a live event, it's OTT, there's an expectation that they should be able to watch from the beginning. So if they come in the middle of an event, we are recording as we go and allowing people to go back to the beginning. And again, as soon as the event is over, we try to get the assets up as quick as possible so that people can watch it on VOD.
So when you're doing that, are they dealing though with a live manifest still, where they aren't allowed to, for example, do things like maybe fast forward through ads as you do the start over experience?
Well, for us, we currently don't include ads in the live broadcast, and so that's not an issue. It's literally just the camera or the broadcast that's coming from the satellite with usually the ads taken out. But people can move through the ads if they're starting back from the beginning on that recording from the DVR.
What about Corey or?
Sure. We have to provide a DVR window from the start of the event to allow the user to go back in time if they so choose to do so, because that's also from an interactivity standpoint, that's how we also continue to draw the users into our offerings that then branch the narratives from the main timeline. So if we have a live event like E3, we may be popping other noteworthy items on the screen for game trailers that you want to see in its entirety and not just the clips that you see out of the E3 broadcast itself. So we give the ability to actually pause that live stream, go into this game trailer experience. At the end of that game trailer, we take you right back to the live playhead, and then unpause the DVR services. So we do kind of have that idea of both live and catch-up TV all kind of culminated into a single event in terms of a infrastructure play for us.
And for us, not to bombard you with fashion, it's kind of that's one application, and obviously we have VOD there. And that's an event where you don't really have any type of rights issues or anything like that. Generally, to be quite honest, sometimes uncleared music gets used, like if they have a side agreement with the artist or something like that. But so you don't really run into anything where you have to time shift or anything like that. But a different application, like something like a music festival, for example. So if we'll do something like that, that's something where you're still creating VODs as you go through this festival. So you have Coachella or something like that. So you want to make sure that you have all those pods created already. And in the VOD, like, so that festival ends, and if the application in that situation is you go to like a channel type workflow at night where you can watch the day's events, maybe you have 20 out of 25 artists cleared and you can't play those 5. So having all of that VOD kind of already in a playlist allows you to kind of time shift it, change it around a little bit. And sometimes they'll do something where you have to take the DVR functionality off and you can watch it as live, but it's a playlist playing out. Just because like it's weird and doesn't make any sense, but sometimes the rights are such that even if it's a playlist playing out, it has to play as live to the viewer.
So in terms of the in terms of software-defined video and how that has enabled you to do some of this in terms of streamlining workflows as compared to what you would have done, let's say, 3 or 4 years ago, can you talk a little bit about the contrast between how you are streamlining things today in your workflow versus what you potentially were doing prior to this to accomplish the same objective? Maybe some people in the audience haven't moved all the way over to really using some of these capabilities that are now available in software platforms. So it'll be good to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, at least, I mean, like I said at the very beginning, I mean, a huge thing, and a lot of you understand this as well, is just having technology that works. Like, if you can't establish that baseline, you'll never get anywhere. And so, I mean, from very early on, we're big fans of the Elemental platform, just because it was one of those things that you can set it and forget it. Not that you should do that, but it's, you know, it'll work every time. You know, we were able to take the Fashion Week project from where it was to somewhere where nobody ever would have expected, by kind of integrating that, having the flexibility. So that way, I mean, because we all know, like, you can plan everything you want in a live show, and then somebody comes to you an hour beforehand, by the way, can we just do this, or can we just do that? And, you know, if you're very limited and you're kind of planned for just what you need to plan for, the answer is always going to be no, or we can't do that, and you never want to tell somebody that. You want to be able to say, no problem, or that'll happen, like, we can do that, no big deal. And having that flexibility kind of over planning in that way, even if like, for example, Elemental Live, there's a lot of things you can do with that. It's almost like a switcher in several ways. So I mean, like when we were building up to what we now have as our cloud workflow, I mean, we were able to loop files and kind of create that VOD workflow on site. So it wasn't quite as efficient as it is now, but it was light years ahead of where it was when we started the project. And then transitioning that then from the on-site workflow to the cloud is something that, you know, like we've all been talking about, that really takes it to the next level, because then you're sending one delivery stream, that same workflow, you've been able to take it somewhere else. So you can be, I mean, there's been times when we've, you know, looped files from a phone in a cab going from one venue downtown back to Lincoln Center, and, you know, the Michael Kors team is super happy because the file's already in VOD. They have no idea that you did it from taxi. So having that flexibility and making sure that everything runs flawlessly like that is great, because if you're always chasing down problems, then, you know, that's a position I would never want to be in.
Yeah, to that point, I think one of the things that we've done as a team at Xbox is really make sure that we have the right tooling in place to be able to accomplish the goals and tasks that we need to, whether it's clipping, whether it's storing, whether it's streaming up, or moving large files around our ecosystem. One of my encode engineers is actually synonymous with on-the-road starts of events. So he'll actually be in his car on his tablet or phone and actually be logged into the encoders and actually starting events, which is, you know, again, it's about the tooling. It's about working smarter in new and interesting ways, whether you're at a Fashion Week show site or you're on an airplane traveling somewhere. To always have those tools available to you so you can actually manipulate your workflows and not disrupt the customer journey, because at the end of the day, if the customers feel like this is kind of a janky kind of setup, then they're going to go away and they're going to think you're kind of a clown. And so we try our best to basically put our best foot forward, always think about the customer journey, and do what we can to actually make sure that that experience is going to be 100% solid every single time.
So one of our challenges, which is I think a little different, is that for some reason all these sporting events go on at exactly the same time, and so we've got a lot of downtime, and then suddenly we have to ramp and scale like crazy. So on a weekend, maybe 200 events are going on, and they all start between 2 and 4 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon. It's all about being able to deal with all these live events coming from all over the world and having a central place to process them that we can scale up and scale down as needed, which is very hard to do without cloud service to do that.
So that's, go ahead,
I have
Corey.
a quick
Yeah.
follow-up question. When you say that you have 200 events starting simultaneously between 2 and 4 p.m. on a Saturday, how are you actually ingesting or managing the workflow input to acquire and encode and deliver all those simultaneous events? Is it mostly over fiber, or are you using traditional satellite, or how is the ingest process work on your end, and how do you manage that?
So we have many different forms of ingest, given that we have different facilities and different origin points. So in some cases, we're pulling off a satellite facility in Stockholm or in Madrid or Barcelona, or we're pulling directly from a college campus. And so we pull those files with processes that we built on our own to then put them through a standard process. So
Yeah, I would imagine trying to manage 200 simultaneous events would be a pretty daunting task without the right tooling.
So it's actually with 200 events over the weekend, but
Yeah.
most of them starting on Friday or Saturday.
Right. But still, there are tens
Still
of events that
overlap,
are
right?
simultaneously
I mean,
going
up
on.
to
Right.
up to 40 or 50 at a time.
Yeah, and that's, I think this is, it's very interesting because, a couple years ago, we couldn't talk about this. We couldn't talk about how you can actually bring the content to a point where anybody can watch that content anywhere at their leisure with different monetization models. And one of the advantages of having a software-based solution is not only can you centralize a lot of this production, you can scale it, you can look at the costs that are associated with actually doing something like this, and you can put different monetization models in place, which is clearly what I'm hearing from across the audience. They're all different monetization models. There's subscription-based, there's ad-based, there's transactional-based models, and all of them are being implemented simultaneously based on the rights that you've got. So what I'd like to do is just end with a quick word from each of you regarding where you see this going in terms of, what are some of your exciting plans that you have, that you're putting in place as you look forward, as much as you can share, and then we'll open it up for questions. So do you want to start, Victor?
Sure. So the big thing with my company, Jupiter Return, is that, we started out as, live production, like streaming shows, that type of stuff, which that was fun for a while, but that battle was won. Like, we won that battle, 10 years ago. Like, we accomplished it. It became pretty easy, like, relatively. I mean, obviously we all know it's not easy, but if you know what you're doing, it's easy, right? But, so like putting the video on the screen is like a battle that's already been conquered. I think the exciting thing for me is now kind of approaching all of these events that we do from a very strategic perspective, kind of applying that next layer on top of actually delivering the video. And that branched out from the fashion events, and we've been able to apply that now to like music festivals and like we did a big video game tournament in Brazil, and we applied a lot of that to that event, where we did like an after-hours type of programming thing that wasn't necessarily just VOD. It was more kind of continuing the story of the event outside of the confines of the convention center that the tournament was happening in. But just approaching events, and now that we have the ability and we have the technology and we have that capacity in the cloud to kind of expand infinitely. I mean, the platform that we developed is enterprise CDN that we developed on our own. So that the technology is available for all of us to use. But now it's kind of like really putting your mind to it and delivering results above just how many people watch the stream. So the client gets something, a much more rich experience out of it.
Some of the things that we're hoping to do over the next, obviously, couple quarters or even the next couple years is obviously continue to develop our two-way interactive television layers so we can actually engage the audiences in new and fascinating ways that create excitement and we want the users to come in and watch our events, but sometimes it's not content, and the content is not always enough for attracting those eyeballs to screens. There has to be something else there to help engage the users in the audience for them to want to have a differential experience, and that's what we're actually trying to build at Xbox.
So what we see moving forward is that sports rights have always been sold by territory, and in general, the home audience is really only where it's sold, and then maybe a smattering of other countries. But there's truly global audiences, and there are so many sporting events out there where people are not able to see, you know, the events that they want to see. I mean, classic example is the Olympics, and we can never see the trials or the individual heats. We only see a curated version of the Olympics. But moving forward, people will be able to see everything they want to see, and all that content's going to be shipping around the world in real time for these live events. This is going to be a big change in consumption habits moving forward. We've already seen a huge change with TV everywhere and being able to do catch-up TV. And it's changed the way people are subscribing to operators and the way people actually create content now. Instead of movies, it's now episodic shows. This will have a major impact on the world of live events as people learn that they can get what they want when it's live or shortly thereafter in VOD.
Thank you very much. If there are any comments or questions from the audience, we'd be happy to take a couple while we have some time. Yes, go ahead.
Oh, no microphone, okay.
I'll repeat the question.
My stage voice. The question around live events and live captioning. Question around live events and captioning of live events. And then are you able to use those caption files downstream in VOD archival footage? And then consequently, are you translating those captions into other languages for some of the international distribution options that you were just discussing?
Corey, do you want to take that, since I think you do a lot with captions?
Sure. So captioning on the fly is typically, for our live events, typically done with the traditional phone-in kind of teletype translation. A lot of our VOD workflow allows us to actually be smart about some translation layers we use in the cloud today via our Azure engagements. So as those video files are being kind of pushed through our origin layer, they're being translated to a text, so you have a voice-to-text translation. Obviously, it's kind of machine learning kind of thing. So, for example, there's a gentleman that works at Xbox. His name is Larry Herb, Major Nelson. Well, his last name is H-Y-R-B, but the voice-to-text translation calls him Herb, H-E-R-B. So there's obviously things we need to go and do to be creative of how we clean up those text translations. But certainly once we've created the text translations, we have those posted not only for the live event, but also for VOD.
And translated to different languages too.
We don't actually translate to different languages at this point in time, but it's something we are looking at from a perspective. We do translate the key graphics that we do for our live events in multiple languages via our backend systems.
Yes, go ahead.
How important is CDN and the selection of CDN in live versus, say, VOD or something that's not real time?
Who wants to take that one?
CDN for us and what we do is critical. It's not only a partnership, but it's an extension of your data center. It's an extension of your application environment. So many times, people ignore the fact that it's sometimes a checkbox in your portal workflow or whatever cloud solution you're using, or it's a phone call to a guy, say, hey, I need a CDN config spun up, here's the host name. If you don't go in and tune those specific workflows, every single one of our workflows in our environment, we've got hundreds of CDN workflows, both from an on-prem and off-prem origin perspective from their storage containers. But each one of those traffic configs is specifically tuned not only for the client, but also the specific parameters around the actual content being delivered, whether it's JSON file or XML, whether or not we need E-tag headers, whether or not we go in and change the cache directives, the TTL values to make it more rich and a more performant experience for the last mile. If you can't make your application environment extend via CDN to somebody in London so they have the same experience as somebody in LA, then you failed in your mission.
It's definitely a much more difficult prospect than VOD because of the nature of live, and there are a number of activities we know going on to help optimize some of these, but you're inherently going to be limited. One of the key things with live events tends to be, the question of latency. how much latency are you adding to this because of the work that you need to do. But the inherent protocols that you're going to use and the trade-offs between the choices that you make in those protocols are going to dictate to some extent how you can fine-tune on your latency. And then, of course, from a load perspective, you still have to plan for that and make sure that you have the available capacity and the ability to essentially manipulate your experience based on kind of the load that's coming up. One of the things with Delta that we do is, it was interesting in the conversation this morning, Yahoo was talking about their video router algorithms, and Delta actually implements a lot of that today. So you have the ability to do stream sets, you have the ability to do filtering based on, and it's all done through manifest manipulation in live mode at the delivery origin level or even down at the edge level. So, but it's a great question. It's kind of an important consideration, and there's still a lot to be done, a lot to be learned across CDNs and across the people who actually use those CDNs to deliver live events. Definitely a challenge. Okay, we are 11:15, right on time. Thank you very much for your attention. We appreciate it, and if you have any other questions, happy to talk to us.